Dear viewers, welcome to Dana Toba. Today we are going to talk about the economic and political confrontation between Europe and China. Is it possible for France to turn against China now? Because there are already more and more conflicts between France and China. However, the European economy is not as good as the American economy after all. You can't just turn your back on it. Therefore, the strategy of the Europeans is quite inscrutable and incomprehensible. Then we will spend some time discussing it. Is it possible for France to turn against China? Former French Foreign Minister Le Drian, when he met with former Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga in 2020, he spoke a meaningful sentence to describe France's attitude towards China. He said that when dealing with international relations in terms of affairs, China is a partner of France. In the field of trade and economy, China is a competitor. In terms of political system, China is an opponent. Now people may think that France is not very strong. But in fact France is a traditional power in Europe. So far, France is still the 7th largest country in the world in terms of GDP. France has always regarded itself as the big brother of the European Union. In fact, before the rise of the United States, Europe was the center of the entire world. Europeans have the most powerful speeches. The Europeans killed each other in the Second World War was too miserable, so the Americans gradually rose to become the hegemony of the world. France looked down on the United States so much, thinking that the United States is a country that has no culture and only eats McDonald's, so Germany is pro-China and not pro-American. In fact, these former overlords are somewhat dissatisfied with the current overlord of the United States, but now, since China wants to win the world, and China wants to rise to become the big brother, these former overlords will certainly not have no ideas in their hearts. The United States and China have started from the trade war to the technology war and to the point where the Cold War is close. This is the most important and heavyweight issue in the world. So will Europe follow the United States? Will there be a trade war between the EU and China? The answer is very unexpected. In fact, the EU and China have already fought a trade war. Between 2012 and 2013, the EU once launched a solar energy trade war against China. In China, they called it the EU-China photovoltaic trade war, or it is a photovoltaic anti-dumping case. China calls the solar energy industry the photovoltaic industry, and the European Union is actually the earliest ancestor of the current wave of trade wars. At that time, the European Union launched the solar energy trade war because the Chinese government heavily subsidized the solar energy industry. When we use solar energy to generate electricity, we must put the panels in the sunlight and convert the light energy into electricity, right? At that time, the Chinese government heavily subsidized these solar panel factories. After these factories received government subsidies, they sold these solar panels at a very low price, below the cost price. Solar panel factories in other countries all closed down because of this. At that time, there were many solar panel companies in Taiwan, because solar panels were also made of wafers. In a large foundry country like Taiwan, it is very simple to use a wafer with poor quality to make solar panels. However, at that time, many Taiwanese companies closed down just like this. A lot of industries have been persecuted by the Chinese government to the point of bankruptcy. You see, Taiwan's manufacturing industry is so competitive, but it is about to go bankrupt. How can European companies not die? A large amount of super cheap Chinese solar panels were dumped to Europe, and the European photovoltaic industry closed down one by one. So the European Union felt very unhappy, and they decided to impose an additional 11.8% temporary anti-dumping on Chinese photovoltaic products tax. And they plan to increase the tax rate to as high as 47.6% in the future, so the Chinese government wants to jump into the sea. The Chinese government thinks, I spend so much money on subsidies. Just hope that these factories will bring down factories in other countries, so that I can dominate the world. In the future, Chinese factories can have the right to determine prices. In the future, these factories will increase their global sales, and they can pay taxes back to the Chinese government. This is the Chinese government's calculation. Then, but if you ban my products and don't let my solar panels be sold, wouldn't my investment be like throwing money into the sea? In fact, this is the synopsis of the battle between the United States and China for semiconductor hegemony. The United States sanctioned China, and China's investment was lost. How could China allow this to happen? In the end, under China's very active negotiations, they guaranteed that their solar panels would have a price threshold, and they would never sell their products below this price in the future, so the EU was willing to reach a compromise plan. Why? Can the EU and China reach an agreement? In fact, a very important reason is that the European economy is not strong enough. Although the downstream manufacturers of optoelectronics directly compete with China, they hate Chinese manufacturers very much. He hopes that the EU will sanction them. But, this optoelectronics, the upstream suppliers of key components are in great need of products from China. Because the average import price in China is very low, and the finished products they assemble are very price competitive. However, the EU's economy is not strong. Blocking China will harm European companies, which is unacceptable. Germany, for example, was pro-China in the time of Merkel. They were very opposed to this anti-China policy. Then, France and Lithuania, Taiwan. As for my good friend, they all stand against China, and the follow-up impact of this matter is actually very large, because in 2014, the U.S. Department of Commerce launched an anti-dumping and anti-subsidy investigation on Chinese solar products. It can be said that this EU-China trade war is the prequel of the current US-China trade war. In the end, China will use the domestic market to save its optoelectric industry. Because they have been sanctioned by the United States, so they have no choice but to vigorously promote green energy power generation in the country. I can't sell my electric panels, so I have to eat them myself. I can generate electricity myself. So, it's funny that the Chinese government actually promoted the green energy policy of solar energy earlier than the Taiwan government, because their products were sanctioned by the United States. And the European economy, after all, is not as strong as the United States. In this way, the US government has sanctioned Chinese semiconductor companies. Although the relevant US companies such as AMD and Nvidia benefit will be compromised, they will soon find new business opportunities. For example, at the beginning of this year, the business opportunity of this artificial intelligence robot driven by ChatGPT will soon catch up. The US economy is so active that it can bear the consequences of sanctioning China. Although I have suffered some damage, my new business will be picked up immediately, but Europe does not have such a lively economic strength. And cheap solar panels are more helpful to the EU's rapid promotion of green energy policies. So this European-led trade war ends with mutual concessions from both sides. So France, what have they learned in this trade war? They found that if they are too strong against China, it will actually hurt European companies. It will be difficult for France to lead such a radical sanctions policy in the EU. Therefore, France also realized that it is necessary to gradually develop a set of own methods. So he developed a soft decoupling method. France later developed a set of soft decoupling methods that are both competitive and cooperative. They use China, but at the same time reject China. For example, The case of France's cooperation with Huawei in the telecommunications industry is the best illustration of this soft decoupling. In 2017, Huawei's subsidiary, Huawei Marine, contracted a very important submarine, undersea cable project called the Peace Submarine Cable. This cable was connected from Pakistan in Asia to East Africa, and finally connected to Marseille in France. This plan is regarded as a very important construction of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The supporters of the CCP are applauding. They think that by laying this cable, China will conquer Europe and invade France. However, the Chinese cable can be connected to France. The relationship with North Africa is entirely because France allowed him to do so. France used to be the colonial mother country of most countries in North Africa and West Africa. Up to now, France's influence in the local area is still very large, and many Africans are also trying to get their children to study in Paris. Going to work in a French company is the behavior of noble man. It is actually difficult for any country to enter the infrastructure construction of North Africa or West Africa to compete with France. If any country wants to enter the African market, find French cooperation is the best way. The real fact is not that Huawei captured Africa, but that France chose Huawei. Because the quotation of Chinese communication equipment is better than that of European companies. If the French telecommunications company, it would be more profitable to cooperate with Chinese companies, so they chose Huawei to operate the African market together. For example, in Africa's second-largest French telecom giant Orange Group, its CEO said, "In Africa, our cooperation with Chinese companies has increased, not because we like China, but because we have good business relations with Huawei. And when we need cheap materials and cheap technology to operate the African market, we choose Chinese manufacturers to go there." There is no problem, but back to France, the French government suppressed Huawei. In 2020, France formulated an anti-Huawei law, the content of which is to improve the review standards for telecom operating licenses, but, in fact, it is aimed at Huawei, and it means to wipe out Huawei. After this bill is passed, the French telecom companies SSR and Bouygues Telecom, which cooperate with Huawei, half of their 5G network it has been completed, but because of the passage of this bill, he had to dismantle it alive and accept the loss, which caused them a very large loss. Huawei dare to turn against France because of this? In fact, he didn't dare, because in order to enter the African market, he had to work with a French telecom operator. In fact, Huawei's first 5G equipment factory outside China was located in Strasbourg, France. It's really amazing. After the France telecom ban, you will not be allowed to install Huawei's 5G in the future. Why do you Huawei build a factory in France? Because Huawei can't live without France. In November 2022, Huawei and the Arab ICT organization held a 5G conference in Bangkok. The big boss of Huawei in North Africa said in his speech that the third 5G market in the world is in Africa. 2023 will fully open the 5G era. Huawei will expand local investment. You Huawei want to put 5G business in Africa, you still need to take the lead to get in, okay? So why Huawei wants to open a factory in France? The French have slapped you in the face. French manpower is so expensive, labor laws are so strict, it is not worthy for you to open a factory in France, but Huawei wants to increase employment opportunities. Let France feel that Huawei is very obedient and powerful. Huawei still does this, and it still opens factories in France. Like France, it maintains a certain degree of balance and has a certain degree of dominance. It's called the soft decoupling model. It blocks Chinese manufacturers in France. But if you want to go abroad to do business and make money, then I can tolerate me going with you. This is the French soft decoupling method, but Germany is quite different. In everyone's eyes, politics has been hijacked by the economy in Germany, but France's approach has maintained a certain dignity. However, when Huawei entered the African market, Chinese companies are becoming more and more popular in Africa. After having the right to speak, can France continue to maintain this soft decoupling policy? The conflict between France and China is becoming more and more obvious, so in addition to the solar energy industry, the telecommunications industry and the African market we just mentioned, the conflict between France and China also occurs in the automotive field. The CEO of Stellantis Group, a major European car manufacturer, said that there will be a bloody and terrible war between European cars and Chinese cars. Tesla dominates the market. Like China's BYD and Great Wall Motors, are also sold in Europe. 80% of the electric cars in France are actually imported from foreign countries. What about Chinese electric cars this year? It even declared that it will go all out to hit the European market. According to the car sales rankings in 2022, although the best car sold in Europe is still the Peugeot 208 of the Stellantis automobile group, this car is not an electric car. The sales champion of electric vehicles in France is the Mégane Renault automobile. Although the current sales volume of electric vehicles is far from that of automobiles. In the low and middle-priced electric vehicle market, the sales volume of European brands is it is not as good as Chinese electric cars. The Paris Motor Show in October last year was held in Paris, but the low and medium-priced Chinese electric cars still had a large marketing budget and swept the Paris Motor Show. French President Marc Macron went to the scene to give a speech. When he arrived at the scene, he was dumbfounded on the spot. Why are all Chinese cars? So he announced at the Paris Auto Show that he would increase the French electric car subsidy policy. Macron expressed his gratitude to his European compatriots' urgent appeal. We must wake up to the fact that both the US and China are staring at our market. The situation at the Paris Auto Show really scared Macron. When Macron flew to Washington to meet Biden, he directly criticized the U.S. government's Inflation Reduction Act. We all know that the United States has suffered from inflation during this period. Then the Biden administration had no choice but to offer an economic stimulus bill. He gave many industries troubled by inflation, tax exemptions or subsidy policies. If you produce electric vehicles in North America, according to this Inflation Reduction Act, you will also get subsidies, but this makes Macron feel very uncomfortable. This will affect the sales of my European cars in North America. So Macron strongly demanded that Biden must make concessions. Macron's strong demand does have some effect. The U.S. government is already considering tax exemption for imported cars. In this way, European cars will not be hit. So you see, Macron has already raised the alarm in his heart. As long as you affect French cars, he will turn against you. What kind of means will France use against Chinese cars? We will make a special episode of the video to discuss the bloody battle between French cars and Chinese cars. Although Macron's performance in the Russia-Ukraine war was very poor, he just wanted to be a mediator, and wanted to be the big brother of Europe. He didn't seem to be very helpful to Ukraine, which made people very disappointed with him, but the relationship between France and China is really not that good. In fact, as early as 2019, when the European Union announced the European Strategic Outlook document, China was already regarded as a strategic competitor in the document. At that time, Macron said that he was very happy to see awakening in Europe. He said that the relationship between Europe and China should not only focus on trade, but should first be on political, geographical and strategic relations, and trade is only a part of it. If Europe gradually develops geopolitical and strategic dependence, it will soon find that it has to pay a price at that time. Both sides will fail. After Macron said such words, when former Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited France in 2020. The French government announced before his visit that a Taiwan representative office would be established in Provence. Slapped Wang Yi hard. Of course, Beijing is very unhappy. But the more unhappy things are still to come. In the next year, 2021, because the media in various countries have exposed the issue of Xinjiang concentration camps. France will not only vigorously condemn it. Moreover, China has been abruptly stopped the EU-China investment agreement by EU that is about to be passed. What is this EU-China investment agreement? China was about to be suffocated by the US-China trade war, so they urgently asked for help from Europe, hoping that Europeans could replace the US and become China's important trading partner. They did not expect to be beaten by France in the end. Not only that, but the two chambers of the French Parliament even overwhelmingly approved their support for Taiwan's participation in UN agencies and international affairs. This matter made Beijing even more angry. Although France and China seem to seldom scold each other. However, in recent years, the European Union has launched a global gateway plan to prevent China, and the European Chip Act. Everything has the strong support of the EU's big brother France. The military cooperation between France, Japan and Australia is essentially the same. In fact, it is also a strategic siege against China in the Indo-Pacific region. France even sent nuclear-powered submarines to sail freely in the South China Sea. The United States alone is about to drive China crazy, and Europe is also on the verge of turning its face against China. Future videos will focus on how European countries have conflicts of interest with China in Africa, and new videos will be launched. Comment on likes and remember to subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching.